on va accueillir Patricia, CHIRIL, et on va terminer donc notre premier atelier, donc, qui porte sur les lignages et le suprémacisme. Et donc, nous allons écouter Patricia, CHIRIL, qui a soutenu sa thèse à l'Université de Toulouse et qui est actuellement chercheuse postdoctorale à l'Université de Chicago. Elle travaille donc sur, elle a travaillé sur la détection des discours de haine, hate speech, et de systèmes suffisamment capables de détecter ces discours dans les réseaux sociaux et autres. Hein. Ces recherches actuelles se concentrent sur la manière dont différents personnages sont présentés dans les livres pour enfants, pour comprendre comment je suis en train de traduire de l'anglais, comment les enfants rencontrent ces messages, comment la rencontre des enfants avec ces messages peut avoir un impact sur leur comportement et leur disposition émotive. Voilà. Et je vous passe la parole.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen. I think it's okay, right? So just to complete a little bit, disciplinary-wise, I'm a computational social scientist. So basically, I'm working at the intersection of artificial intelligence and society with a focus on language, social linguistic and natural language processing. So as mentioned, I currently am a postdoc, and although I switched a little bit my research focus prior to coming here, I was predominantly working on developing these hate speech detection systems. So basically, we were using computational techniques for analyzing large amounts of data just to understand the social disparities that exist in society. And I'm still working a little bit on this, but it's not currently my main focus. So as we listened in the previous talks, we heard that social media is actually poses a threat to minority groups because we have all these calls for violence online. And I just wanted to bring you a little bit closer to my domain and show you a little bit. We're not going to enter a lot into detail, but if you want, during the discussion, we can discuss deeper this subject, just to see how we deal with the moderation of this content online and what exactly are we looking at when we are trying to moderate this content. So my talk today is going to be a little bit more from awareness and ethics and biases in natural language processing or machine learning models kind of perspective. But it's still relevant to the computational science work because many of these artificial intelligence techniques are increasingly used for large-scale analysis to gain insights about the society. So if in these measuring devices themselves we have bias, then we might actually introduce systematic bias into our analysis. And this is not something that we would want to do. I'm just going to briefly, let's say, summarize Aryan nations because they cover lots of topics that are targeted by hate speech. I'm not going to enter a lot into detail, and we already have a talk that very nicely explained everything that there is to explain. So Aryan Nations is a prominent Christian identity-based hate group that was founded in the United States at some point in the 70s. So in the 1970s and in the 80s, the Aryan Nations developed strong connections with the neo-Nazis, the KKK, as well as with the white supremacists and militia groups. So basically, the adherents of this movement believed that white Aryans were the chosen people, and basically the Africans were subhuman, the Jews were descendants of the devil, and basically that the world was moving toward a race war. And they also were stating that Adam, which is God's creation, is actually the father of the white race only, and basically all the known Aryans are not merely inferior, but they also have to be destroyed. What I wanted to focus on is the fall of the Aryan nations, because they started receiving a lot of bad publicity when a former Aryan Nations guard fired a gun at the Jewish Community Center in Los Angeles. And after surrendering, he actually declared that his murder spree was intended as some type of wake-up call to America to kill the Jewish community, and that he had killed the Filipino-American postal worker just because the man was non-white and worked for the federal government. Another very pivotal event in the history of this organization was when the security guards assaulted and chased and shot a woman and her son after they just briefly stopped their car on the road in front of their compound. And the lawsuit that was brought on behalf of the victims actually bankrupt the founder of the organization and the Aryan nations. And at that point, some of the followers actually began defecting to other churches that, similar to this one, preach white supremacy, but it has distanced itself a little bit from the glorification of Nazism. Finally, the death of the founder accelerated the splintering of the group. And I know that there are still groups that continue to use this name, but as far as I'm aware, none of them actually gained the influence or membership that the original organization had. So as we know, people increasingly use social networking sites not only as their main source of information, but also as a media to post content and share their feelings and opinions. So we know that even Aryan nations were using the internet and email and chat rooms and online bulletin boards to spread their messages. So this is why I wanted to look a little bit at how we can counter this issue, how we can moderate this type of messages that exist online. So social media are convenient because these websites allow users to reach people worldwide, which in theory should facilitate a positive and constructive conversation between users. However, as we've seen, especially in recent years, this phenomenon has a downside because there are more and more episodes of hate speech and harassment that occur in this online communication. And this is due in especially to the freedom and the anonymity that it's given to the users, and to the lack of effective regulations that are provided by these social network platforms. So here are some examples where hate speech online escalated in real world case problems. So we saw that in Germany, there is a correlation between anti-refugee Facebook posts by the far-right Alternative for Germany party and attacks on refugees. In the United States, we see that white supremacist groups use social media as a tool to distribute their messages and called for violence against these minority groups. We also have cases in Myanmar where military leaders and Buddhist nationalists use social media to slur and demonize Muslim minorities ahead of and during campaigns of ethnic cleansing. Okay. So given the rapid development of technology and in particular the impact of online platforms on the society, some legislations to better regulate these tech giants were enacted. So for example, we have the Code of Conduct for Countering Illegal Hate Speech that requires that this platform have in place clear and effective processes to review notifications regarding illegal hate speech so that it can be removed, as well as providing rules or community guidelines clarifying that promotion of incitement to violence and hateful conduct is prohibited. Now, we have these rules. The problem is that given the amount of social media data that is produced every minute, it's physically impossible to manually moderate everything online. So that's why we need to rely on automatic methods. In spite of having no universally accepted definition of hate speech, it seems that there are some common elements that arise. So, for example, in particular, we have messages that express threats, harassment, intimidate, or disparage a person, or more generally a group, on the basis of some characteristics such as race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, gender, and so on. We have various other concepts that are related to hate speech. In general, what I'm going to present today, it's actually focusing on hate speech because this has the strongest impact on the victim, so on the person that those messages target. Just to clarify a little bit this concept and the relationship with each other, we have this figure that proposes a classification of the overlapping abusive phenomena. So we can see that abusiveness has a broader coverage, and it covers several more specific abusive phenomena such as hate speech, aggressiveness, and some other related phenomena with more specific targets. In general, the studies in my research domain deal with different areas of online hate speech. And the most important research topics in the literature can be grouped into ethnicity-based hate speech. So there we have racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism, and gender-based hate speech, where we have sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. Another thing that happens in research in this domain, the researchers tend to look at hate speech in general, very broad. So we don't, most of the research papers are trying to put under the same category all the groups that are targeted by hate. So there is no clear distinction between is this message intended to harm a woman or an immigrant or a Muslim? We don't really know. Or more recently, we have some studies that started looking at specific phenomena. In one of our papers, we actually proposed a multi-target hate speech detection approach. So in this paper, we leverage existing data sets in order to detect both the topics and the hate speech targets. So for this, we relied on some manually annotated data sets, of course, that can be grouped into categories. So we have topic generic data sets. These are the data sets where we have a broad range of hate speech. And in this case, we don't limit it to specific targets. And we have a second subset of data, which is topic specific, where the hate speech category is known in advance. So here, when we talk about targets, we refer to the community. So we have either the individual or the group that receives the hatred. And in this paper, we actually addressed two targets. So the first one was ethnicity, and we were looking at xenophobia and racism. And the second target was women. So we were looking at sexism and misogyny. We were trying to answer these three research questions. So first of all, we wanted to see if it's enough what it's currently done, just looking at generic hate speech. So what if we have generic data that we know that talks about a specific, in multiple groups, and we are trying to detect hate speech that targets a specific subcategory. So for example, if I have data that contains just general hate speech and I want to detect hate speech towards Muslims? Would I be able to do that? Unfortunately, with the current approaches that exist, the models usually fail to account for the linguistic properties that are specific to those particular topics. Another thing that is really interesting is the fact that in general, in machine learning, we're saying that the more data you have, the better your system is going to be. But we observe that even if we have a smaller amount of data, but the data, it's linked to particular groups that are targeted by hate speech, the results actually tend to increase, as opposed when we have maybe double that amount of data that just focuses on general hate speech. And another really interesting finding is that it's very good to have data that refers to a specific topic that it's included in the same target. So for example, let's say that I want to be able to detect hate speech that targets Muslims, but I don't have data for hate speech that targets Muslims. Then I can rely on data that targets another topic under the target ethnicity. So for example, if I have data that deals with hate speech against immigrants or hate speech against Jewish people, I would be able to better detect the hateful content that is addressed to Muslims, as opposed when we have data that again has a very broad coverage of different hateful topics. Another important question that we need to ask when we train this model is the data that we usually use to train the model a reliable representation of the world that we want to model? So in line with previous works, we observed that the bias has a very strong impact on target-based hate speech detection. And we observe this usually when we switch a little bit the data that we work with, and we observe a very steep incline in the results. So just because I got a little bit ahead of myself with the previous slide, I wanted to come back and just mention that the data bias is a systematic distortion in the sample data that compromises its representativeness. So basically, this means that the data that is available is not capable of properly capturing the studied phenomena. And this is a problem because the technologies for hate speech and abusive language detection in general are being developed and applied with little consideration of these potential biases. So bias may reduce the accuracy of these models, and at worst, it will actually mean that the models actively discriminate against exactly the same people that we are trying to protect by building these models. So just to illustrate what I was talking about, we have this figure which contains phrases in African American English dialect. And we see that these phrases are labeled by, this is a publicly available toxicity detection tool, Perspective API. And we see that this tool assigns to these messages that are written in African American English dialect a toxicity score a lot higher than to the instances that are written in general American English, and they are basically equivalent, these phrases. And this might be explained because of the presence of some specific terms. So, for example, we could have something like queer or the N-word. And these terms were previously used, these sparse communities, but have been in time reclaimed exactly by those communities, and they remain offensive only when they're used by the outsiders. So this might be one of the reasons why this kind of tools tend to take actions against this type of language. Another thing, we would know that African Americans are often targeted with, for racism and hate speech. And we would expect that white people are actually more likely to use racist language. But it was observed in these negative labels that are assigned by these type of models that are more often to be assigned to texts that are actually written by African Americans. And there are different studies that find evidence of substantial racial bias in these data sets that are widely used for building hate speech detection systems. And this is quite unfortunate, as such systems will actually penalize African Americans at a higher rate. And this in the end is going to just result in racial discrimination. One final thing that I wanted to discuss about is stereotypes, because there are previous studies that actually suggest that there is a significant correlation between the usage of stereotypes and hate speech. So when we interact with a new individual, we tend to associate him as belonging to a certain group, right? Because it becomes a little bit easier to infer information from the previous knowledge and the experience that we had with similar individuals. And this simplification with regards to our beliefs and expectation towards an individual through the process of stereotyping has significant downsides, because it involves making generalization based on characteristics that are attributed to a social group without actually taking into account the individual and situational constraints of group members. So if we look just a little bit at a couple of instances that already exist in the dataset, we see that the second and third examples here, both of them contain stereotypes. So in the first case, we have, okay, all Muslims are delinquents, so they are murderers, they do only bad stuff, right? And afterwards in US, we have all the illegals are coming here just to get welfare. So basically to abuse the people that pay, the US citizens that pay their taxes. So we know that stereotypes can be both positive and negative, but in general, the information that they provide, so the information that we draw from there, so what the group is like, and why the group members are the way they are, is often linked to negative attitudes towards the member of that particular group. So like these stereotypes represent the root cause of intergroup tensions. So we have racism and sexism and so on, because the stereotypes convey information which models our behavior towards the members of that stereotype social group. And in addition, stereotypes are also model the way in which the members of that stereotype social group actually perceive themselves, which could be quite harmful for them. Finally, stereotypes can be seen in most of the cases as causes internal to the social group that they are relatively stable over time. And by stereotyping social groups and their members, we actually play a very crucial part in the expectancy for success of that group. And in turn, this might limit the opportunities that we allot to these members, because we deem them as not being capable. So these are some of the directions that we look at when we are trying to detect hate speech on social media. For the moment, most of the research focuses either on gender-based hate speech, so sexism and misogyny. For the ethnicity-based hate speech, most of the research focuses actually on hate speech that targets Black people. There are no studies that look at religion, actually, and I think that this is why I'm actually happy that I managed to attend today, because you have so many information, and you have like your insights in the domain are actually welcome for researchers like me that work on hate speech, because you can actually offer us more details, and you can point us in the right directions, and actually tell us what to focus on when we want to detect hate speech towards different religious groups and this kind of yes, groups. That's all. So, I don't know if maybe it was a little bit, I know that it was a little bit out of context, let's say, like it wasn't very close to what you presented, but it's just maybe open the door towards collaboration between our domains, because you have the insights, and it's better to actually work with people that know what they are talking about. So we don't introduce, we actually have this issue when we work with data, because not a lot of the researchers work with people from the particular domain that they are trying to analyze. And on top of the bias that already exists, we also introduce author or like researcher bias in our models. And that's even more problematic, because we have bias on top of bias on top of bias. And yeah, in the end, it's something very complicated to manage.